The fountain stopped first. In a city where water had always been a promise of life, silence became an omen. Baghdad had heard many sounds across its long existence, debate echoing through courtyards, the scratch of pens in lamplit rooms, the call to prayer rising above crowded streets. But this silence was different. It was heavy, unnatural, as if the city itself had drawn a final breath and was holding it. Outside the walls, the horizon darkened, not with clouds, but with riders. What approached Baghdad in the winter of 1258 was not merely an army. It was a force shaped by a worldview entirely alien to the city it was about to consume. The Mongols did not see cities as achievements. They did not see libraries as treasures or dynasties as sacred. They saw the world as something to be tested, broken, and reshaped by power. And Baghdad, confident, ancient, brilliant, failed that test. What followed was not just the fall of a city. It was the unraveling of an entire way of believing that knowledge, faith, and tradition could protect you from reality. And at the center of that collapse stood a family whose fate would become a quiet horror, whispered across centuries. To understand why Baghdad fell so completely, you must understand the man who ruled it. Al-Musta was not merely a political leader. He was the Abbasid Caliph, the symbolic successor of the Prophet, the living embodiment of an empire that had once stretched across continents. For nearly 800 years, the Abbasid line had survived rebellions, civil wars, assassinations, and invasions. That endurance bred a dangerous illusion, permanence. By the time Al-Musta inherited the throne, the empire's real power had already eroded. Provincial rulers acted independently, military strength had weakened, advisors filtered reality before it reached the caliph's ears. Yet the titles remained, the rituals remained, the belief remained that Baghdad was untouchable simply because it had always been. Al-Musta ruled from palaces heavy with gold and ceremony, surrounded by men who mistook comfort for stability. He believed his position itself was protection, that the sacred weight of the caliphate would deter any enemy bold enough to approach its heart. This was his greatest mistake, because the Mongols did not fear symbols. They feared only weakness. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, had already reduced entire regions to silence before reaching Baghdad. Cities that resisted were erased. Those that surrendered survived sometimes. His reputation moved faster than his cavalry, carried by refugees and terrified messengers who spoke of absolute destruction. When Hulagu sent his demand to Baghdad, it was not poetic. It was not negotiable. It was simple. Submit and be spared. Resist and be destroyed. Al-Musta dismissed it, not because he had a plan, but because he had faith in inevitability, in the idea that some things simply could not end. He trusted in divine favor, in tradition, in the weight of history. He believed the world would pause before crossing such a line. The world did not pause. When the siege began, it became immediately clear that Baghdad was unprepared not just militarily, but psychologically. The Mongols brought methods unfamiliar to the city's defenders, advanced siege engines, relentless coordination, and an indifference to loss that shocked those accustomed to ritualized warfare. Day after day, the walls broke, and with them, the illusion of safety. When the Mongols entered Baghdad, they did not rush. They did not need to. The city had already collapsed inward. Resistance had fragmented. Authority had evaporated. The Caliph, once distant and revered, was now simply another man in a conquered palace. Al-Musta was brought before Hulagu. There was no dramatic confrontation, no mercy begged that could still be granted. The power imbalance was absolute. The Caliph's titles meant nothing here. His lineage meant nothing. His God, if present, did not intervene in ways visible to those watching. What followed has been recorded differently across sources, some restrained, some clearly shaped by horror and rumor. But they all agree on one thing. Hulagu intended to make an example, not just of a man, of a dynasty. The Mongols believed that killing kings was not enough. Authority had to be humiliated, emptied of meaning, stripped of dignity before it was removed from the world. Al-Musta was forced to confront the wealth he had trusted more than preparedness, more than realism. His treasures, amassed over generations, were revealed to be useless. Power that could not defend itself became a liability, and then his family was brought in. Royal families are often remembered as symbols, names, and genealogies, faces and paintings, abstractions. But they are still families, parents, children, siblings who grew up believing the world was structured around their survival. That belief died in that throne room. Accounts of what happened next are fragmented, partly because many chroniclers could not bring themselves to write everything down. Some details were softened, others were omitted entirely. What remains is enough to understand the intent without repeating the cruelty itself. The callous children were used to demonstrate that lineage offered no protection, that intelligence, refinement, education qualities prized in Baghdad were meaningless to conquerors who valued domination above all else. His sons were executed according to Mongol custom, a method chosen not for efficiency, but for symbolism. Their deaths were meant to end the Abbasid line visibly, undeniably. His daughters were not killed immediately. For the Mongols, death was not always the harshest outcome. Survival under erasure, loss of identity, language, and future could serve as a longer punishment. One daughter disappeared into the steppe, absorbed into a world that had no place for her past. Another was carried far from Baghdad, her name eventually forgotten even by those who owned her fate. The youngest survived longest. She lived, according to later accounts, long enough to remember what she had lost, but not long enough to reclaim it. A living remnant of a civilization that no longer existed. As for Al-Musta himself, his death followed Mongol tradition designed to end him, without granting martyrdom or honor. No public execution, no spectacle worthy of legend, just quiet suffocation beneath ritual and indifference. The Abbasid Caliphate ended not with a battle cry, but with silence. What happened inside the palace was only the beginning. Once the symbolic heart of Baghdad was destroyed, the rest of the city was treated as already dead. The Mongols moved through neighborhoods methodically. There was no distinction between scholar and laborer, merchant and beggar. Survival depended on chance, not virtue. The house of wisdom, the intellectual center of the Islamic world, was destroyed. Manuscripts representing centuries of human thought were burned or discarded into the river. Knowledge that had survived wars, translations, debates, and time itself vanished in days. Witnesses later wrote that the Tigris darkened not metaphorically, but physically stained by ink and debris. Whether exaggerated or not, the image endured because it captured the truth. This was not just slaughter, it was erasure. Baghdad did not merely lose its people, it lost its memory. Civilizations often believe their greatest achievements will protect them. That brilliance creates immunity. That knowledge makes them indispensable to the future. History does not work that way. Baghdad was not destroyed because it lacked culture or intelligence. It fell because it mistook legacy for security, because it believed no one would dare destroy something so valuable. The Mongols did not care about value as Baghdad defined it. They cared about obedience, and Baghdad resisted, not with strength, but with denial. In the years that followed, survivors scattered across the Islamic world. They carried fragments of what they had seen, memories too heavy to share openly, stories softened to survive retelling. Baghdad ceased to be the center of gravity. Knowledge moved elsewhere. Power shifted. The world adjusted. But it never forgot. The Mongol Empire itself eventually fractured. Conquerors became rulers. Rulers became names. Names became footnotes. Yet the fall of Baghdad remained fixed in historical memory as a warning. Not about Mongols. About complacency. About the danger of believing that past greatness guarantees future safety. About what happens when leaders confuse symbolism with strength. When people speak of Baghdad's fall, they often cite numbers, death tolls, dates, statistics. But numbers do not capture what was lost. They do not capture the silence after the fountain stopped. They do not capture the moment a family realized their name no longer mattered. They do not capture the feeling of standing in a city that no longer recognized itself. This story endures not because it is shocking, but because it is instructive. Because it reminds us that civilizations do not collapse only from external force. They collapse when internal certainty blinds them to approaching reality. Baghdad believed it was eternal. History disagreed, and that disagreement reshaped the world. So when we return to this story, centuries later, we do not do so to sensationalize suffering. We return because memory is the only defense against repetition. Because forgetting does not erase pain, it only removes the warning signs. The fountains went silent first, and by the time anyone understood what that meant, it was already too late.